All right, get ready to dive into the world of AI and genomics. We're looking at this paper about Omni-DNA, and it's like, wow, imagine like your doctor knowing exactly which treatments would work best for you just from your DNA. Crazy.
Yeah, pretty wide stuff. This research is really pushing the boundaries of what we call genomic foundation models, like
Mm.
AI that can understand DNA sequences, but on a whole new level.
Okay, so not just reading the DNA, but actually getting what it all means, how it all works together.
Exactly. And what's cool about Omni-DNA is it's like a multi-tool for genomics. You know how other models are kind of specialized, like good at one thing, but got to retrain them for everything else?
Right.
Omni-DNA wants to handle a bunch of different jobs, all with just one training session.
And why is that such a big deal? I mean, I'm kind of getting it, but
Well, think about it. These models are massive, like billions of parameters. Training them takes tons of time and resources. So if you can train it once and it can do a bunch of things, that's huge. Saves everyone a lot of headaches.
gotcha. So like if I was prepping for some big meeting about personalized medicine, this paper would be like top of my reading list.
Definitely. This paper, Omni-DNA, a unified genomic foundation model for cross-modal and multitask learning by Zui Li and a team from Microsoft Research and Imperial College, London. It basically lays out a whole new vision for genomics.
Okay, so how did they even build this thing? It sounds like a two-step process, right?
Yeah, so first they pre-train Omni-DNA on like this massive amount of DNA data. It's kind of like teaching it the basics of the language of DNA. Then they fine-tuned it on a bunch of different tasks all at the same time.
And those tasks weren't exactly easy, right? I was skimming the paper, and it's talking about predicting epigenetic markers, promoters, enhancers, even like figuring out what species the DNA came from.
Yeah, it was a pretty tough test. And Omni-DNA, well, it crushed it. They used two main benchmarks, the nucleotide transformer and the genomic benchmark. And Omni-DNA achieved, get this state-of-the-art performance on 18 out of 26 tasks.
So it's not just hype, it actually like delivers.
It really does. And here's something even crazier. They found that sometimes Omni-DNA was actually better at doing multiple tasks at once than models specifically trained for just one of those tasks.
Wait, hold up. So multitasking actually made it better? How does that even work?
Well, the researchers think it's because Omni-DNA is like figuring out connections between the different tasks. It's learning, in a way, a deeper understanding of how DNA works because it's seeing it from all these different angles.
That's wild. Okay, so we've got this AI that can analyze DNA like nothing we've seen before. But can it tell us what those genes actually do? Like, translate that DNA code into something we humans can actually grasp.
That's where it gets really interesting. They actually had Omni-DNA translate DNA sequences into descriptions of their function. Like, imagine an AI explaining what each gene does in plain English.
Whoa, did it actually work?
It did, and surprisingly well, even compared to some super powerful language models like GPT-4. Of course, it's still early days, but it hints at a future where AI could help us really understand the human genome.
This is blowing my mind. So we've got this AI that can analyze DNA like crazy, and now it's starting to explain what the genes do. What else did they test this thing on?
So they had this really cool challenge called the needle in the DNA task. Basically, they hid these specific DNA sequences within larger sequences, and Omni-DNA had to not only find those needles, but also create an image representing a handwritten digit, like 0 through 3.
Hold on. It was creating images from DNA. That's like straight out of science fiction.
Right, it's wild, and it totally nailed it. It found the hidden sequences and made recognizable images of the digits. This means its capabilities go way beyond just like text-based analysis. We're talking about a whole new world of possibilities here.
Okay, so far we've talked about how Omni-DNA is changing the game in genomics. It's analyzing raw DNA, understanding gene function, even making images. But let's be real, there's got to be some limitations, right?
Yeah.
Even with groundbreaking stuff like this.
Oh, absolutely. The researchers themselves point out that we need better ways to tokenize DNA, especially when we're talking about complex outputs like images or even 3D protein structures.
Okay, tokenization. I hear that word a lot with AI. Can you, like, break it down for us in plain English? What does it mean for Omni-DNA?
Basically, it's about breaking down the DNA data into smaller pieces that the AI can work with. It's like turning a sentence into individual words, but for DNA. They used a method called byte pair encoding, or BPE, but they acknowledge we need more advanced methods as these models, and the things they do get more complex.
So, like, as we push the boundaries of what these models can do, we also got to make sure they can actually read and understand the data, right?
Exactly. The way you tokenize the data can have a big impact on how well the model performs, especially with things like generating images or those protein structures.
Makes sense. So the more complex the output, the fancier the language needs to be.
You got it. But even with those challenges, the future is looking pretty bright. Omni-DNA is a huge step towards what we call a general-purpose AI for genomics. It could totally change how we understand DNA and potentially unlock a new era of personalized medicine and scientific discovery.
All right, so we've got this powerful new AI tool, and it's clearly shaking things up in genomics. But how does it all connect back to that idea of personalized medicine we were talking about at the beginning?
Well, imagine taking all this information, the DNA analysis, the gene function insights, even the potential to visualize it all, and using it to create treatments specifically designed for you.
So not just predicting if you might get sick,
Yeah.
but actually making treatments that work with your unique DNA.
That's the goal. And while we're not quite there yet, Omni-DNA is a big leap in that direction.
My head is spinning. This has been an amazing start to our deep dive on Omni-DNA.
Definitely. I'm excited to see where we go from here.
Yeah, stay tuned for part 2, where we'll really dig into what Omni-DNA could mean for the future. We'll be talking about how it could change healthcare, speed up scientific discoveries, and maybe even reshape how we understand what it means to be human.
Sounds fascinating. Welcome back.
You know, I'm still kind of stuck on how Omni-DNA was actually better at doing a bunch of tasks at once compared to those models that were just trained for one specific thing. It's like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, you know?
Yeah, it's super interesting. It suggests that maybe by learning across all these different tasks, Omni-DNA is developing a more well-rounded understanding of DNA, like a deeper level of understanding that we haven't really seen before in these kinds of models.
It's like it's seeing connections that we might miss because we're so focused on one specific thing at a time.
That's a great way to put it. And it really shows the potential of AI to uncover those hidden patterns and connections in complex data, like the human genome. It's pretty exciting stuff.
We were talking earlier about that needle in the DNA task where Omni-DNA was actually generating images from DNA sequences. That seems like such a wild application of this technology. Can you tell me a little more about what that task involved and what it tells us about what Omni-DNA can do?
Sure. So the researchers wanted to see if Omni-DNA could handle what we call cross-modal learning, basically learning from different types of data, in this case, DNA sequences and images.
So it's not just about processing text-based data like the letters in DNA. It's about connecting that information to like visual representations.
Exactly. So for the needle in the DNA task, they took these specific DNA motifs, those short but important sequences, and hid them within larger sequences. Omni-DNA had to first find those hidden motifs and then generate an image that represented the corresponding handwritten digit, like 0 through 3.
So it's like the model had to like decode a secret message hidden in the DNA and then turn that message into a picture.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. And the fact that Omni-DNA could actually do this and do it accurately really shows how versatile it is. It has the potential to go way beyond just traditional DNA analysis.
The results were definitely impressive. It was finding the right motifs and making images that you could actually recognize. What kind of implications could this have for like future research?
I mean, the possibilities are huge. Think about being able to visualize the structure of a protein straight from its DNA sequence, or maybe even creating personalized genetic portraits that show someone's unique DNA in a visual way. Who knows what we could do?
That's like next level data visualization. It could totally change how we understand and explain these complex scientific ideas. But let's switch gears a bit. We talked about pre-training earlier. You mentioned that Omni-DNA was pre-trained on this huge data set of DNA sequences. Can you walk me through why that step is so important?
Pre-training is essential. It's like building the foundation for a house. You can't have a strong structure without a solid base. For Omni-DNA, pre-training meant showing the model a ton of DNA data so it could learn the basic patterns and relationships in those sequences.
So it's like giving the AI a crash course in DNA.
Exactly. During pre-training, the model is basically learning the language of DNA. It's figuring out how to predict the next letter in a sequence based on what came before. That's how it develops a deep understanding of the structure and, you could say, the grammar of DNA.
And that foundation is what lets it do all those more complicated things later on, like figuring out what genes do or creating images.
Right. The pre-training gives Omni-DNA the knowledge and skills it needs to really excel at those more complex tasks.
It's amazing how they built this kind of general intelligence for genomics, but I'm sure there were some bumps in the road. What were some of the biggest challenges they had to overcome while developing Omni-DNA?
One of the toughest things was finding that sweet spot between making the model super complex and making sure it was still practical to use. These large language models can be really resource intensive. They need a ton of data and processing power. So the researchers had to carefully design Omni-DNA's architecture and training process to make sure it was both powerful and efficient.
So it's not just about making the model bigger and more complicated, it's about making sure it can actually be used in the real world.
Exactly. They also had to come up with some clever ways to tokenize the DNA sequences and handle those cross-modal tasks, like making images.
Speaking of tokenization, you explained that a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
Can you go into more detail about why that process is so important for a model like Omni-DNA?
Sure. Tokenization is how you convert the raw DNA data into something that the AI can actually understand. It's like translating from one language to another, but for DNA. Omni-DNA uses a method called byte pair encoding, or BPE. It basically breaks down the DNA sequences into smaller chunks called tokens.
So instead of trying to understand the entire DNA sequence at once, the model is working with smaller, more manageable pieces of information.
Exactly. And the way you tokenize the data can actually affect how well the model performs. The researchers tried different methods and found that BPE worked best for Omni-DNA.
It sounds like tokenization is really important, but it's something people might not think about too much when they're talking about AI development.
You're right. It's an area where we need a lot more research and innovation. As these models get more sophisticated and the tasks they're doing get more complex, we have to find better ways to represent and process the data.
This has been a really interesting look at the technical side of Omni-DNA. We've talked about its structure, the pre-training process, and the challenges of tokenization. But now I'm really curious about the potential applications. How could Omni-DNA change healthcare and scientific research?
That's a great question. Get ready for some mind-blowing possibilities.
All right, so welcome back for the final part of our Omni-DNA deep dive. We've gone pretty deep into how it all works, but now I want to talk about what it means for us. Like how this could actually change things in the real world.
It's the big question, right? And the possibilities are, they're huge. It's pretty exciting stuff.
Let's start with healthcare. We talked about personalized medicine before, but can you really paint a picture of how Omni-DNA could change things, diagnosing and treating diseases and all that. Okay.
Imagine your doctor can look at your DNA and actually predict, like years in advance, what diseases you might be at risk for. That's the kind of power we're talking about.
So it's not just waiting until you get sick. It's about being proactive, maybe even preventing those diseases from ever happening.
Exactly. Early intervention is so important, and Omni-DNA could give us the tools to do that way earlier than we can now. And think about drug development. Imagine designing treatments that are tailored to your specific DNA.
That sounds kind of sci-fi, but it's getting closer and closer to reality, right?
Yeah, it is. And Omni-DNA is pushing those boundaries even further. We're moving towards a future where medicine is truly personalized, predictive, preventative, all of that good stuff.
It's mind-blowing to think about what it could mean for, well, just being healthy. But what about scientific research? How could Omni-DNA speed up discoveries in biology and medicine?
Well, we're only just beginning to understand the human genome, right? There's still so much we don't know about how our genes work and how they all interact. Omni-DNA could be the key to unlocking those secrets.
So it's not just about looking at the data we already have. It's about making new discoveries, right?
Absolutely. Think about using Omni-DNA to find new drug targets, or to finally understand the root causes of those really complex diseases, or even to learn more about human evolution.
Those are some pretty ambitious goals. Do you really think Omni-DNA has the potential to make that happen?
I think it has the potential to go even further than that. We're seeing this amazing convergence of AI and genomics, leading to breakthroughs that we wouldn't have even dreamed of a few years ago. And Omni-DNA is right at the forefront of that whole revolution. It's pretty remarkable.
I also want to touch on the ethical side of things. We're talking about really personal information here, people's DNA. How can we make sure this technology is used responsibly, ethically?
That's a super important question, and it's something we need to be thinking about right now as we're developing this technology. We need to have clear rules about data, privacy, security, access, all of that, and we need to make sure that everyone benefits from this technology, not just a select few.
Those are really important points. This technology has the potential to be incredibly powerful, but that means we have a big responsibility to use it wisely.
That's exactly it. Great power, great responsibility. You're right. We need to be careful and thoughtful about how we develop and use this technology, making sure it's used for good and that the benefits are shared fairly.
This whole deep dive has been an incredible journey, honestly. We talked about the nuts and bolts of Omni-DNA, all the amazing things it can do, and how it could transform healthcare and research. But as we wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about.
I'm all ears.
So we're basically on the edge of this whole new era of personalized medicine and genomic discoveries. What are you most excited about? And what keeps you up at night thinking about all this?
What really gets me excited is the possibility of, actually reducing human suffering, curing diseases that have been around forever, and making life better for millions of people. That's what drives me, and I think Omni-DNA is a powerful tool to help us achieve that. But at the same time, yeah, it keeps me up at night thinking about the responsibility we have. We need to make sure we're using this incredible power wisely and ethically for the good of all humankind, not just a few.
Well said. It's a good reminder that even with all these technological advancements, the human element, the ethical considerations, are more important than ever.
Couldn't agree more.
And that's a wrap for our Omni-DNA deep dive. Thanks for joining us. I hope you found this as fascinating as we did. This technology has the potential to change everything, and it's going to be really interesting to see where it all goes from here.
Definitely. The future of genomics is looking pretty bright, and Omni-DNA is leading the way.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and stay curious.